So outside of Kentucky, it's the biggest place on the East Coast for
That's
thoroughbred
intense.
horse racing. And so those things come in, and they're like, I'm not sure, but I think I want to kill everyone and then myself.
Yeah.
Like, just, it depends on the day.
And they just get sick left and right.
Yeah, oh God. Why were you built with lungs? I understand why your lungs are the way they are. Please.
Your lungs, your stomach, your
Oh.
intestines, nothing right. Your feet.
No. The one true toe. Why? I mean, I know evolutionary biology totally makes sense, but oh my God.
That's really neat. And then you went into policy.
Yeah, I went, I left, so I graduated from Penn in 13, and then that fall I started in a fellowship in Senator Gillibrand's office. And I stayed there for
Cool.
7 years, actually a little more than 7 years.
Just one pointer. For the stream, we're going to need you guys to speak to the microphones as
Yep.
much as possible.
Sure.
You can pick them up and move around with them.
Okay.
Feel free to tug on the cords if you want to a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, awesome.
Cool.
Amazing.
And you were hunting for the clicker dude.
Yeah, we're
Thanks, man.
hunting for it right now.
And then I basically decided to stick around, really enjoyed it. About 2 years ago, I left Kirsten's office and went to work for NSAC,
Cool.
which is where I've been for
Yeah.
the last 2 years. So
Very cool.
it's been a wild ride.
And were you with Gillibrand mostly on rural issues or like ag issues or just?
Yeah, no, I had a great portfolio. I had,
Hi.
hello, sir. Everything's great. We're just looking for a clicker, but other than that, we're doing well. I don't have, no, there are no videos in the slide deck. Cool, thank you.
Could get that fancy someday.
Maybe. Today's not that day. Yeah, I handled agriculture, nutrition, the arts, and space were my portfolio.
Space like.
Yeah, like space. So,
What?
yeah, well, this is the biggest nerd in the office, and I basically
So
angled for it
cool.
for a while. It had been with our defense fellow, or defense staffer for a while, and finally I was like, no, I want space. So I
That's
did
so
space.
cool.
It was neat.
What kind of questions do we have policy-wise about space? Is
Oh,
it
God.
spending or?
No, air traffic control.
Really?
Yeah, that's the problem right now.
Hey.
I don't know if you found another way to print these, but it came off the printer when I tried to print
Oh,
mine.
amazing. I'll just have two. How did your presentation go? Speech, keynote?
Well,
It went
Yeah.
awesome is how it went.
but I don't know if you have slides, but the clicker is kind of unresponsive.
Okay. Oh no.
There are a few times I'm
Oh,
like,
hey, how's it going?
Terry.
Terry, Eric, very nice
I
to meet
wasn't
you. An
cool
absolute
enough for
pleasure.
slides.
Thank
I'm
you for
just
all your
winging
help
it
for
here.
and getting this all together.
I did read through your notes and I was like, oh, very complimentary
okay.
in the end, so I'm excited.
Looks like
Did
we
you
got
get
it
good
going on.
response to? Some of the stuff you were saying is pretty hard hitting. No one was like, what are you?
You know, I didn't see anyone like storm out.
Yeah,
Awesome, thank you. Thank you.
in a good way. That's
You gave us the
awesome.
big room, like no pressure.
That's what you want.
I walked in this
Very
morning, I was
cool.
like,
I
oh,
want to
guess the
sit
big
down and
room.
talk about your new job, right?
We'll
Yeah.
see. If
Because I
not,
just met with.
trust me, I'm happy
very
to talk
bad at
myself.
names.
There's also the root.
Eric? No.
Oh, that's, of course.
The exec of the Ian, my bad. And your comms person.
Nice, thank you, sir. Wonderful.
There's a number of them.
Okay.
Or Reese or. No, I'll give you back and I'll
I
give you
should
a
not do
kind of
this
a-
because I won't
Okay.
remember. But they were lovely and we were very
Okay.
taken by
And
the model
we've got
and just kind of how we
an
could
hour and 15, is it?
partner and all that, so. Honestly, I'm talking about it.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to have lunch together or if you have stuff to prepare for now, but.
No, at this point, I'm like, the less I think about it, the better it might go.
Well, my workshop is in this room after this.
Awesome.
You can meet here. We
Are
can
you doing one about comms model?
No, that was yesterday. Today, it's just kind of like a reflection integration, like facilitated conversation, and not really
Oh.
presenting. It's just like creating a space for people to kind of reflect on the year and the conference and what they're going to.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, well, let's try and find each other for lunch. Amazing.
So, tell me about this French town you came from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is southwest of Paris,
Okay.
very rural,
Okay.
and no one knows it's 500 people.
So very small. What region is it?
It's Parisian.
Oh, is it really?
Considered Parisian, but Paris is very like. Have you
Spreads.
been to
Yeah.
Paris?
Okay.
And it has two highways going around it.
Right.
And once you exit the like outer highway, it's like
Flat.
like
Yeah,
nothing
there's nothing.
anymore. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we were kind of beyond that
Okay.
area.
The reason I asked is because this is a really long story that I don't need to tell and I won't, but my wife routinely sends me Redfin houses in DC. And they're $1.5 million, $1.75 million, and I'm like crazy. So years ago, I went on to a website mostly geared towards British expats looking to buy castles and sort of like classic, like sold my flat in London, moved to buy a castle. And so as a joke, I started sending her castles that were this exact same price. And as a result, I have spent a lot of time looking at French rural real estate. Like a
There's a lot
surprise.
of also still like affordable land and old farms that you can buy for nothing and rehab. There's more of that still than there is in the States, but not our area.
Right. No, well,
It's
that's why I
Paris
was,
is like taking over.
no, I was going to say that's why I'm surprised to hear that there is still like a 500-person agrarian community outside of Paris. Like that's a
But if you know Versailles,
yes.
there's another small. That's mine.
Or a black Lexus EU69758.
The Subaru is mine.
Right.
Oh. Oh. Where should I park? Just somewhere that doesn't have a cone. Okay.
I will hold down the fort.
Thank you.
Yes. You do not want to go out to no car. He got us hooked up. He already did. Yeah, man. Sorry.
I'm trying so hard.
I appreciate it.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. You guys feeling okay now? Great.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. It's just going to be a minute. What's that?
Did you have the early slides?
I do, actually. Yeah. Okay.
We'll give it another.
Yeah.
Just gonna wait a couple more minutes as people confirm.
So her car was in a place that it wasn't supposed to be?
Yeah,
Okay.
COVID test spot.
What's that?
A COVID test spot.
I don't even know what that is.
It's COVID testing.
Oh, over in the, where they do the little drive-through. Gotcha, okay.
For those of you that just arrived, if you have a black Lexus EU69758, can you let me know? Oh. You maybe don't wish today, actually. Great. I think we'll start. Catherine's just had to go leave her car, so she'll be back really soon. But you're at the Farm Quality for People, and Eric and Catherine are going to take you through the session. They'll introduce themselves when it comes to that point. I'm here if you need anything, but other than that, just remember that the power of the people is much bigger than we think, and it's amazing how few people influence policy.
It's very
So
true.
a few people getting together can make a massive difference.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone. As we just learned, Catherine is moving her car, so she'll be back and joining us in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and start without her, which is okay because I've got the really boring and dry stuff at the beginning, and she's got all the cool advocacy stuff at the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and hop into it now, and I will catch her up when she arrives. So first, I know this has been said to you many times over this past couple of days, but it is so nice to see real people. Oh, I'm really loud. I'm surprised. Is this any better? Cool, thank you guys. Appreciate that. Sorry, virtual people. And not to take away from the virtual people, but I am actually really happy to see people in person. It has been 19 months since I addressed a group of people larger than 5 in person, so this is actually really lovely. And the fact that I get a chance to do it with Catherine, who is wonderful, on a subject that I'm passionate about, I know she is as well, and I think you guys should be passionate about too, because really, there is an opportunity on the horizon for all of us to really make a transformative difference in food, farm, and agricultural policy. And it's in the Farm Bill. I'm going to introduce myself. I am Eric Diebel. I'm the Policy Director at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. That is a DC-based coalition of grassroots organizations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Prior to this position, I was the senior policy advisor for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, the junior senator from New York, where I handled ag, nutrition, the arts, and space for her, coolest portfolio in history. And I come to agriculture mostly through the back end of a dairy cow. I am a dairy cattle veterinarian by profession before I went into policy. Really? I never need to mic up. This is great. Okay. Tell me if it starts to pop a little bit. I'm going to leave this slide. We'll come back to it for Catherine. She can introduce herself better than I can. So real quickly, NSAC is a grassroots coalition organization. There's about 130 grassroots farmer and farmer-serving organizations all around the country. We've got hundreds of additional partners, and we work on federal policy, and just federal policy. We don't get involved in state-based work, although many of our members choose to do so. So as you can see, we've got pretty decent representation here in the Pacific Northwest. A couple of folks that I've seen today, actually, who are members of the NSAC Coalition. And what we do as a coalition is kind of unusual. And when I say we're a coalition, I mean it. It's a real coalition. We bring together leadership from all of these different groups in a highly participatory process where we help develop food and farm policy that works good for people, producers, and our system. We have farmers and other stakeholders, so those would be farmer-serving organizations and member groups. And then we've got our team of about a dozen folks in DC who help create policy. And then obviously we interface directly with Congress and agencies. I live in a space where policy is pretty much all I ever talk about, so I kind of forget that not everybody understands what that means. We are a policy shop and a grassroots organization married together. And so what we can do is if a member of Congress has a problem, they can come to us. And they can come to us and they say, look, we've got a problem. We don't think the conservation program uptake is high enough in our state and we want it to be better. What can we do? We can help design a policy. We can help build a law. We can help modify regs that help that member achieve what they want for the food and farm system. We also take our direction from our farmer and member organizations. So a lot of this information is actually coming up to that member through their own state, through outreach that our members are doing directly. They come over to us and say, help us solve this problem, and then we do. We work with members from all across the country to design the best solutions that we can and try to move them forward. And this is particularly relevant because the Farm Bill's coming. And so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about federal farm policy, the basics, a little bit about the Farm Bill, and then Catherine, who just walked in, is going to talk about the cool stuff, which is how to take action and to build resources. Do you want to introduce yourself? I'm gonna run back up slides here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Unn. I'm the Organizing and Advocacy Director with the National Young Farmers Coalition. And I'm sorry for being late. I parked in the wrong spot. Yeah, at the National Young Farmers Coalition, I oversee all of our outreach engagement and grassroots campaigning for a network of over 200,000 farmers, ranchers, and supporters. I used to work in antitrust and ag and anti-corporate power in the US. And before that, I worked in sustainable livestock production in France. And I'm a horse trainer in the Medhow Valley.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, yeah, skip part 3. We're not going to do that today because we don't have enough time, and other folks are going to cover it better than we will. All right. Before we get into this, it's important to understand that our members care a great deal about equity in food and farm systems. And our current agricultural production system is based on stolen land and stolen labor. This is not a mere historical footnote, as some folks in policy like to talk about it. This is a very real and lived history and experience for many, many people. And the Farm Bill has been the way in which a lot of that systemic racism has been baked in to our system. That Farm Bill has been, at times, the racist cookbook for that built-in, baked-in systemic racism. The land use patterns that we see, farm ownership patterns that we see, farm labor and food system that we have today are supported by and made possible by the policies that are in the Farm Bill, which is why it's important to talk about them. Now, the first farm bills, well, the first farm bills came out of the Dust Bowl. And one of the things that happened in those very first farm bills back in the 1930s was that they did not protect black and indigenous land ownership, and they created a system whereby white farmers predominantly were able to access resources in ways that BIPOC farmers were not. And as a result, that farm bill, that first farm bill, set the arc of much of what we've seen in terms of land loss and dispossession over the last almost 100 years at this point. That's why you wind up with things like 98% of US farmland being owned by white people, even though non-Hispanic white people make up 60% of the total population. And there's been many speakers that have talked this past few days about that issue, and more eloquently than I could. But I do think that it's extremely important to note that not only can the Farm Bill be a tool of oppression, it can be a tool by which oppression is relieved or undone. And that is something that our members care very much about and would like to see in this next Farm Bill. That isn't to say that progress isn't possible. There have been things in the Farm Bill that have been really helpful, including things like the creation of set-aside programs for BIPOC producers, including the programs for socially disadvantaged farmers, also often called 2501 programs. Nutrition programs are also part of the Farm Bill, so everything from SNAP, well, actually it's mostly SNAP because WIC and school meals are handled in a different bill, which we won't get into here, the Child Nutrition Reauthorization. And also a lot of healthy food access programs, so things like farm-to-school programs and double-up food bucks and programs that support farmers markets. But there really is a need for some real structural change within the Farm Bill. And the things that we're looking at are ways in which the Farm Bill upholds systems of oppression and what kind of changes can be made to existing policy and programs to undo some of that oppression. All right. So I just kind of launched into the problems with the Farm Bill without really addressing it, but I just wanted to get that said up front because I think it's really important and I didn't want to skip over it. So why do we even have a Farm Bill and what does it look like? Farm Bill's weird. And it doesn't have really any analog in any other policy space other than defense. And I think you should read into that both defense and agriculture are incredibly important for our national interests. I would put agriculture ahead of all, but I'm also really biased. And so those are the two spaces in which there are bills that come up for renewal every couple of years in order to make sure that our policy is where it needs to be
and that we are in a good place as a nation. The Farm Bill was created, like I said, out of the Dust Bowl, and it had a kind of a two-prong approach. There were huge market destabilization, not completely dissimilar than what we've seen over the past 2 years. And so there were real concerns about food supply, and there was a tremendous drop in prices, which caused a lot of farmers to not put crops in, which then, of course, created more concern about food supply. And so the government stepped in and created a series of programs, and it was a series of programs in those first couple of bills that became the Farm Bill that helped to ensure that farmers would have a minimum price for the crops that they produced, and that there would be unimpeded access for those products getting into market. The other thing that it did was, and I think that we forget this sometimes, is it really did sustain natural resources. That was a primary focus of it, because again, think Dust Bowl, right? There was huge internal immigration and displacement caused by what is essentially an agricultural calamity. And so that first couple of farm bills had at their heart a message around conservation of natural resources. In the current Farm Bill, there's a couple of different things in there. There's commodity programs, right? So lots of folks growing commodity crops benefit from provisions in the Farm Bill. Nutrition programs, that's a huge part of the Farm Bill. SNAP is probably about 3/4 or about 2/3 to 3/4 of the entire Farm Bill. And then there's conservation programs, which we're going to talk a little bit about today because I like them a lot, and I think a lot of folks in this room probably care about them too. The one thing, like I said, that never really has been addressed, although that could have been at any time that the folks in power wanted it to be, were issues of structural racism and racial equity. So the cool thing about the Farm Bill is it comes up every 5 years, and in it are all the policies that basically form the roadmap for American agriculture. And again, it's really remarkable that this comes up every 5 years, so we've got the opportunity to adjust it and make changes. And Catherine's going to talk about the way to be effective in doing that. Again, I'm just doing the dry, boring stuff of what's in it. But it has a couple of things in it that are really important. And one is authorizing language, and the other is funding language. It influences what we eat, what opportunities are available for farmers in rural communities. It impacts natural resources and the environment, and of course, the economy as well. Every program that USDA has at its disposal, and that includes all of the rural development programs, the rural business programs, all of the farming and agricultural programs, are in the Farm Bill. They all started there. And all of those programs were created by powerful advocates that had a concern, that wanted it addressed, and eventually built it into a Farm Bill that better met their needs. So I said authorization language. Getting a little tiny bit wonky here. Authorizing language is a bill, right? It's how you write something on a piece of paper, put it into Congress, Congress approves it, goes to the administration looks at it, goes, we need rules, they make rules about this, and then they drive it out into the field, and that is what ag policy is. That's what authorization language does. It's that scribble on a piece of paper that makes everything else happen subsequently. So in the Farm Bill, all of the programs that you all are interested in or care about, they're all defined. How long it lasts, who is eligible for it, how it's funded, whether or not the money is mandatory, which means it shows up every year without action, or discretionary, which means that Congress has to fight over how much money goes into that program. Eligibility criteria for those folks that may be interested in using the program, and even priorities for certain farmers. So things like that 2501 set-aside that I mentioned before, and the total amount of resources that might be available for any program. Sometimes you'll hear folks talk about the Farm Bill and they'll talk about titles, right? And this changes over time, but generally it kind of sticks to this list here. So most of the time, NSAC and other folks that we work with spend a lot of time in Title II, and sometimes in Title V and VI. And basically what you're looking to do is, if you have a concern or a problem, you want to make a change in federal policy, you need to find the title where it's at, get familiar with the language, and start figuring out how to fix it. So I just said everything that you care about in agriculture is in the Farm Bill, and I lied, but only a little bit, right? There are a couple of things that aren't actually in the Farm Bill. And this gets into really technical stuff about committees of jurisdiction, but suffice it to say that there are a couple of things that really matter to rural communities and farmers and other types of ag producers that aren't in there. Farm worker rights and protections, not in there. Issues of public grazing lands and public land access, also not part of the Farm Bill. Food safety as it relates to FSMA and non-protein, non-FSIS, non-USDA stuff, also not in the Farm Bill. School meals, WIC, environmental programs and regulations like the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act are not part of the Farm Bill. And that's a source of great frustration and consternation to folks very often when they're looking to fix a problem in the Farm Bill. Sometimes the thing that they really care about isn't there. And so you either have to get really creative about how you advocate or how you write policy to sort of nudge at those policies or at those issues from the Farm Bill vantage. And the problem is, you get a chance to correct the Farm Bill, marginally improve it every 5 years, but you're gonna have a really hard time fixing the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act if they're not working for you. So the Farm Bill is the vehicle that we have and the opportunity that presents itself, but it may not be the perfect venue to drive the change that we want to see. There are, and I just put this in here because it's kind of pandering, I know a lot of you folks are using these programs, and so just a quick note here that EQIP and CSP and CRP and CREP and Clear 30 and RCPP and that full list of conservation anagrams that exist in USDA, all in that title too, all in that conservation title. So how big is a Farm Bill? Oh, overshot. It's big. It's really, really big. So the entire Farm Bill, this is only over 5 years. So the Farm Bill lasts 5 years, but because Congress is Congress, they budget everything over 10 years. So this is a 10-year bill that's actually worth about $850 billion, which is enormous. Every 5 years, the spending nets out to about $428 billion. And as you can see, like I said at the top, the nutrition programs take up a lot of that bill, which is fine. Sometimes you'll hear people be concerned about that, but that connection between nutrition programs and agriculture programs are part of what drives the Farm Bill across the finish line. There used to be this thing, this perception among policymakers that SNAP and nutrition assistance programs were primarily benefiting urban communities, and that agricultural policy sort of rode along with that, and that there was this sort of suburban, urban, rural marriage of convenience around the Farm Bill. I think over the last couple of Farm Bills, we've gotten past that notion, and part of the reason is because of changes to the economy and some structural issues. SNAP participation rates are higher in rural communities than they ever have been in the past, to the point now where 2/3 of the non-metropolitan and rural communities have higher SNAP rates than the urban environments or the urban census districts they're adjacent to. So no longer is this a notion that SNAP helps cities and Farm Bill, the rest of the policies help rural communities. That's not true, and there's now a general understanding that all of these policies help every community, which has changed the dynamics of who wants to be on the Ag Committee and who wants to push policies in farming. And that makes a huge difference for the type of advocacy that you can do. Who writes it? Well, two groups, Senate Ag Committee and the House Ag Committee. They're the ones who actually sit down and put pen to paper every 5 years, and they don't do it by themselves. They listen to members of Congress. They hold hearings. Some of you may have participated in hearings or been to them or watched them online. They talk to farm, food, and rural advocacy organizations, and of course, voters, right? All of these folks are electeds, so what their voters tell them to do, they tend to be fairly sensitive to that, maybe not as much as we would like sometimes, but they are receptive to input from voters, or they don't get to keep their jobs. So there's a couple of points in here, and Catherine's going to cover them in detail, but that hearing space, conversations with members of Congress and your electeds, and the role that you play both individually and collectively as organizations or individual producers, you can plug in, actually, no, you guys get to vote too, right? So like all of those things, there's all sorts of different opportunities for you to connect to make change. I put this up just because this is not a simple process and it is super duper opaque. And if you're reading general farm press, there are folks that are going to do their best to inform you of what's going on, but often the language is different, the processes are different. Two different things are happening, one on the House side, one on the Senate, in complete isolation, right? And so this is essentially the flow chart. The House, the Senate take up their own bill, they draft their own bill, they bring it together in conference. The conference bills are reported out, then the House and Senate vote on the conference package, comes together, passed by both identically, goes to the president's desk. That's not the important part. The important part, and this is a space where Catherine will talk about, is you can hit each one of those boxes in different ways at different times to have an impact on the type of policy that a policymaker is going to be willing to put forward. Couple of things that I would just really like you all to keep in mind as we get into sort of the advocacy portion of this. When you're looking at a policy, think about how that policy affects the oppression that is built into our food system. Think about how your organizations or even your own advocacy can be leveraged to benefit folks that have not been invited to participate in the policy-making process. And try to think about, even in your own communities, who are some of the folks that might be left out or not have access to resources. And it can be any kind of producer in any kind of place or any kind of community. Just, it is good to be cognizant as we're pursuing the changes that we want to see in a farm bill of the folks that don't have the same opportunity to petition that you might, and keeping their needs and bringing them to the table, having conversations with them, being a good ally and good partner can be an incredibly valuable thing that you can do through this entity and through the other organizations that you're a part of as producers. All right. Do you want to just take it and we'll do questions at the end?
Yeah.
All right. If you guys have questions about like specific program stuff, we'll hold that to the end because I want Catherine to have lots of time to talk about the good stuff.
So as Eric said, oh, thank you. The process of the Farm Bill in DC is quite opaque, but what I want you all to hear from this presentation is that the process of advocating on your end is actually pretty simple, and the steps that you can take as farmers or as folks who care about our ag system are pretty simple. I'd like to do a show of hands quickly. Who's ever talked to their member of Congress about anything? All right. So let's do a quick activity. Why don't you turn to the person next to you or behind you, kind of 2 or 3 people in a group, and talk about what that experience was like, or if you haven't had that experience yet, what you think it would be like.
Such a great example, the difference between an organizer and a policy dork. It's like, it's all facts, and you're like, talk to each other. Like, I don't care if you're talking to each other.
presenting, so anytime anyone else can talk.
No, this is wonderful. This is a great dichotomy. I hope everybody catches it. So this one moves you forward in the slide deck. Do you want to take a look at my screen? Because it maybe keep you from spinning around. You can take it. Yeah, I think we're. Yeah.
So I can move this and not move that.
Yes. So this is just, if you just advance, I've been just clicking through here, and then you can see that's the next one up. Get that training for the next one. Yeah. I think that the discussion about advocacy is more interesting than the minutia of titles, which is why I sort of moved through that quickly. Inevitably, that's the whole thing. Like, there's no way I can anticipate what everybody cares about when I'm having to fix it.
And this group seems to be more advocacy and policy oriented.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is which is different. Like, most of the time I'm having this conversation, I'm talking to like young G's, like
Yeah.
Q-tips, and like seeing people
really cool
under the
group,
age
yeah,
of
yeah.
40, like it's really sweet.
That's Young Farmers Gig. That's Young Farmers Gig.
Yeah, no, it's straight up. This is very on brand for you. Well, now we know who brought him in.
Till's done great work forever, though.
They really. I didn't. It was really cool. I enjoyed the moth story hour last night. It's really wild. The historian got up and talked about like the founding of Till and sort of Barry's letters and that sort of like dissidence and heresies. Like that's I had no idea about that. I know organic, but only from the East Coast perspective. I know Dale, the OG guys, and Hoffner, and like sort of the original convenings around the sustainable ag, national movement for sustainable agriculture, and the whole like east of the Mississippi side of things. So it's very, very different.
Let's come back so we have plenty of time for questions later. But maybe let's have. Well, that's not working. Let's come back now so we have plenty of time for questions later. And let's have maybe one person from two groups share kind of the vibe of the discussion that was going on. Do you just want to raise your hand and make sure you're speaking nice and loud with the masks? Oh, and the whole point of advocacy is not to be shy, so don't be shy.
First rule of advocacy in policy, it's better to say something wrong than to say nothing.
Yes.
I had a lovely conversation with my fellow colleague here, and one of the things that I was talking about was I've been a long time advocate of just calling, writing, whether I'm speaking to an aide, just leaving a message, then I'll call on a Sunday night. I don't have to speak to somebody, and I'll just say something into the voice machine and advocate for some bill that I think is really important. And I've actually met with people in their offices, both in Olympia and also in DC, and I've found that to be very empowering to feel like these people are working for me, and I hired them essentially. So it feels good to be able to have those honest conversations.
That's such an important point. You pay their salaries ultimately, and they work for you. So folks get really worried or scared going in, and they think that they need to have the perfect story or the perfect statistics. That's not true. They're paid to listen. And so you go in there and you tell your story the way you want to tell it, and that's what's most powerful in this process. So thank you for sharing. Let's hear from one more person or group.
Yeah, so my experience, I worked at Puget Sound Food Company. So we represent 50 member farms and farmers cooperative. So our local representative actually stopped by when we worked at so we do, I occasionally get, maybe annually from Congressman Rick Clark to stop by and see how we're doing, see how staff at farms are. He does support it was a brief conversation, for a while. We had Brad go out, all the folks out there, but kind of a unique opportunity.
Very cool, and that's another way of advocating that really puts forward that it's not as important what you're saying, but in a case like this, when your elected official is coming to you, it's what you're showing them, it's the vibe that you're creating, the context, and then when they go back to DC and they're having conversations about policy, they can remember. They might not remember your name, they might not remember exactly what you said, but they're going to remember that experience of being with you and your group, and that's what might swing a discussion one way or the other. So thanks for sharing, and thanks for sharing amongst yourselves. And that, what you just did with each other, is the level of what advocating for policy change in the Farm Bill, like that's the level of complexity. You have folks like us who get paid 9 to 5 to understand what's going on and follow what's going on, and then we turn around and just say something like, there's a hearing, or there's an opportunity for someone to come to your farm, do you want to do it? And the most important thing that you can do in that case is just say yes and have courage and tell your story. And so what's coming in 2022? Advocacy in the Farm Bill, there's different ways that you can get in front of your member of Congress, but the most important is to get in front of them. There is going to be opportunities when they are in recess to invite them to come to your farm, have an in-district meeting. So either invite them to come over if you're lucky enough and they can make time in their schedule, or to go over to them but in your area. That's one way of getting in front of them. The other way is fly-ins. A lot of our organizations are going to be helping you all get to DC and see DC, be empowered by being in DC, and be able to tell your story again in DC. And like this, elected officials, they're hearing the same story, once at home, once in DC, and it starts to sink in, and they start to really want to make change. And then there'll be hearings and other ways throughout the Farm Bill of getting involved. And there, the skill is to really understand the ask that we're trying to make as a collective, and to hone your story, your farm story, and make it make sense with the ask, and practice being able to say it in 90 seconds, really succinctly, but really in a way that's really empowering. So I'll go through some steps of how you can keep track of what's going on with the Farm Bill and how you can get involved. The number one step, but I guess most of you in this room know already, would be to know who represents you at the federal level. Know the name of your senators and your representative. Know which committees they sit on, and whether they sit on any ag committees or any committees that have power over the issues that you care about. And if you feel like doing a bit of extra homework, try to figure out what their history is, what they voted on in the past, what their interests are. And since you all are advocating from a place, try and figure out, do you know them, or do you know people who know them, and do you know what they're interested in? And those are things, just like when you meet someone on a first date, those are things that you can bring up when you're talking to your member of Congress to make the conversation more person to person, seem less stilted. The second thing that you can do during Farm Bill conversations is to make sure that you're aware of what's going on. And that doesn't mean that you need to be trying to listen in on the Hill, literally. There's organizations like ours that listen and that distill the information through our newsletters, like NSAC, us more through Instagram. Depending on what you like, you can sign up for different versions. And just try to be more aware and learn that way just by getting information in. And NSAC has many beautiful resources that are here on their website. The weekly roundup email is what I use in my work to follow what's going on. I'm not a policy expert. I'm an expert in helping people tell their stories to make change. And so I rely on orgs like NSAC to tell me what's going on the Hill. And try to sign up for action alerts from NSAC. We do some too. Ours come directly on your phone. But any organization that you trust, and that you trust that the way that they're translating what's going on in DC directly to you, that's the one I would go for. The one that if they say, can you tell your story tomorrow, that you wouldn't blink once, and you know that you trust them enough to take action with them. I love Fern. If you don't know them, please sign up for, I don't know if it's a newsletter, but they're news basically. They're a group of really great journalists that do the kind of reporting that others don't, and that are really within the future that we want to see in agriculture. And then there's the most exciting part, is the part where you get to talk to your members of Congress. Orgs like ours will help you get that meeting, so don't worry about the logistics of it. You get ready to talk. So get ready to introduce yourself, make that introduction the one that they'll remember. Like I said, if you can find a tidbit that connects you to, you went to the same school, your kids go to the same pool, I don't know. Whatever connects you, that really helps. And if you can get them to your farm, to somewhere where they'll remember the place as much as what you say, that's super impactful too. Yeah, and I think the other part of this is to get other people involved. There's not that many of us in this room. I think if we want to make change in Washington for Washington, it'll take a few more farmers So if you all are already convinced that Farm Bill and that advocacy is the way to go in terms of making the structural change for equity and sustainability in our farm system, then try to get 2 more farmers each involved. Tell them about what you've heard today. Tell them that there's billions of dollars on the line and that all they have to do is tell their stories. And the other part is to trust yourselves as experts. Our members of Congress, they're generalists. They might not know much about agriculture or not the details. You all are the experts that know how you want programs to work, how you want programs to reflect your commitment to racial equity, the changes that you want to see, the amounts of money that work or don't work. This isn't Farm Bill related, but recently at Young Farmers, we worked on the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, that's CFAP. The first round of that program came out, and it just didn't work for young farmers. It was too much paperwork. It was paid by the pound. So if you had 50 different veggies that you grew, you were paid like X amount for carrots, X amount for cucumbers, and it just didn't work. So we called all of our farmers in our network. We asked them what they wanted to see in terms of the next CFAP program, if they were going to do a next round of money. And folks wanted to see just money that was given based on last year's income. And we got that change made. We told members of Congress, we told USDA what we needed. They thought that was a pretty simple change that they could manage. They apologized for not having thought about it, and they did it. And the next CFAP around, the CFAP 2, worked a lot better for young farmers. So you all are the experts. Trust your expertise and go meet with your members of Congress knowing that and having those ideas. I think I've said this many times. Share your story. And don't be scared of sharing it with press, too. I think this picture is of someone who shared their story about Farm Bill and about something that they want, a change that they wanted to see in Farm Bill, but they shared it with press instead of sharing it with their member of Congress. That's a huge strategy in Farm Bill. Members of Congress are very particular about their brand and how people perceive them. And so if they start reading the newspaper and they see that they could do something that could help them get more votes next time around or more dollars for their campaigns, they'll do that. And so press is a very important strategy. And again, don't go at it alone. If you go at it with organizations like ours, you're adding your voice to millions, I think, between both of our organizations, millions of other voices, and having very parallel messages. That's so much more powerful than if you go at it with your expertise, with your story alone, and then they only hear it once. If you go at it with one of our organizations, they're hearing it once, and then again in Iowa tomorrow, and then again in New York the day after that. That's really impactful. And then we're there, as folks who are paid to do this work, to go in DC and say that story one more time and make sure that they keep on hearing it till we get the change that we want.
Yeah. So I did the boring stuff. She did the interesting stuff. Oh, sorry. I did the boring stuff. She did the interesting stuff. I know you guys have questions. Let's have them. The person with the tiny baby. Oh, sure. Actually, we can probably just do the next one here. There's not my contact.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, actually,
But
you
maybe
go back
she
to
might have a question, yeah.
We're getting there.
Woman. This one?
Is this the one that you were looking for? Cool.
Do you have any tips for, 90% of the time I find that I'm going to talk to a page. I'm not going to talk to the senator or the representative. I mean, I'll switch gears there eventually. Any tips on how to interact with aid?
Yes.
Oh, that question didn't go the direction I thought. Thought you were gonna ask any tips on getting to your member of Congress, in which case I would have said, team up. You know, we have access to members of Congress, and because we have more folks behind it and it's more of a group effort, we can help you actually get in front of your members of Congress. So that would be my first advice is don't settle for the aid.
And as an aide for 7 years, she says this with love, I know. So there's different levels of engagement that you can have as a producer when you're talking to somebody who's an aide. And just super quick, you've got staff assistants, legislative correspondents, legislative assistants, legislative directors, and then the boss, the congressperson or the senator themselves. If you are in DC, or you're having folks, there's also regional folks too that work for the member. So your opportunities to engage are probably going to be with regional directors or with a legislative assistant. And the person that you really want to get yourself in front of, if you can, is one of those two folks. If you have a specific policy ask, try to get to the legislative assistant and to pitch your idea to them. There's a couple of things that you can do or that worked really well when people were talking to me about issues that they cared about. You come to me with a problem and a proposed solution. Now, your solution doesn't have to be elegant, it doesn't have to be complete, but you have to give them something to work on. Because if you just say, I have a problem, now it's your problem, well, you're the 30,000th person to come into the office and give their problems to that staffer. That staffer is helpless. But if you get them pointed in the right direction and you start a conversation with them, then you have the opportunity to continue to engage to build out a better policy solution or a better option for the program that's not working for you or the concern that you have. So bring a problem, bring some regionally appropriate information, tell them about how it affects your operation specifically, and then give them some kind of an idea as to how they can help fix it. And if you do that, and they ask you for something, oh, for goodness sakes, please, get them the information that they need. If they say, can you have my boss come out and talk to some folks, get them that invitation. Because what happens is, if you come with a problem, and you come with something that looks like a solution, and you always provide the follow-up that staffer requests, you will become that staffer's friend for life. And wherever they go and whatever they do, they're going to call on you. And eventually, if you're really fortunate and you're good at the advocacy game, and again, you gotta follow all Catherine's tips, not mine, that person will reach out to you and they'll start to turf things to you. They'll say, look, I heard about this problem and I know that you know about this. How would you fix it? And when you get to be in that kind of consultative role, that's an incredibly powerful thing. I know you guys have a lot of stuff going on, that you can't always be that person, I get that. But if somebody calls you and asks you a question and they're from somebody's policy team, do your best to answer. And if you can't, turf them to National Young Farmers or send them to us or send them to TILF or send them to another organization that you have a lot of trust and a relationship with, just so that follow-up happens, because that's really key to building and maintaining a long-term relationship with staffers.
And I can't underscore how much y'all's role is that relationship, and that's really the thing that we can't do because we can't be everywhere at once, and also we can't have that place-based relationship with folks. But I know y'all are really busy with your farm. It's not that much effort. If someone asks you a question that you don't know what the solution is, most likely one of us has a pretty good idea of the solution we'd like to see. And so you can call us up a second later, be like, what should I say about this? And we'll have that answer. So your role in it, if you were only gonna have one role, is to be like their best friend.
And you do pay their salary, but don't remind them of that fact. They don't enjoy that at all because, again, they've heard that 30,000 times. What they really do appreciate is how you're going to help them make their boss look good, right? That is, I have many thoughts on what Hill staffers are and the care and feeding of them, but really at heart, they are frightened, small, scattered creatures that have many, many problems, and they're trying to solve all of them at once. And so if you can give them a thing that they can do that makes them look good to their boss and their boss look good to the public, you're going to win every time.
So, you've been talking about sort of us as individuals, farmers as individuals coming to you, but how important to you are state level coalitions that help to sort of aggregate and bring the voices up? Question one, and then question two, I'm curious to hear how you collaborate. You know, you have OTA, you have OFA, you have NSEC,
To the first question, that's something I'm very passionate about, is bringing together coalitions of organizations and trying to align just enough to have the same ask. And I'd say that's as important as not advocating just as an individual, but advocating as a part of a group. So as an individual, if you advocated along the same lines as young farmers, you're adding your voice to 200,000 others. As a coalition, so as an organization who advocates along with another coalition, and we all add our memberships together, then we can go to DC and say we're advocating for millions. And what they hear is like, that's a lot of voters and a lot of money potentially. And so I'd say that's very important. And it's maybe the most challenging part of working and advocating with other organizations, is the part where we sit down and go, where do we truly align and where does our membership align? And where can we, like, what message can we carry forward together? But I'd say it's also the most important ones, like the things that have been won that were big were things that were won by coalition efforts.
And the more you care about structural and systems reform, the more important that sort of intra-group and intergroup relationship building and coalition spaces are. You know, if all you care about is, you know, the way in which this railroad spur reaches this particular grain outlet, and that's the only, well, that's pretty easy, right? But if you care about why that's important, or where that grain goes, or who grew that grain, or does it support a healthy diet, you know, does its, you know, production practice like replenish the soil, then you're going to need a lot more folks in the room to help you lift up those issues when you're going in to talk to folks in coalition.
And I'll add one more thing just to the racial equity analysis of it. If y'all are part of organizations that are mostly white, this is a moment where you can help your organization represent racial equity and really move towards racial equity, because you have the numbers that other groups that represent just BIPOC folks might not have. You might have more money, more resources. And sometimes folks think of supporting BIPOC or frontline organizations as literal giving them money or giving them access to their printer or helping them with their website. But I'd say the part that really gets us to racial equity and change is where an organization that's mostly white or that's really privileged and powerful can put all their weight behind a policy that might not even affect their members, but that has that racial equity change behind it. So I'd say that's also a really important piece of what you were talking about. And then we were both laughing about the coalitions questions, because at least for folks like me in organizing that really believe in that coalition effort, and if we do believe that structural change takes folks from across the sector, then yes, we spend our time making coalitions of coalitions and coalitions within the coalition. And I'll plug the Young Farmers for the Farm Bill. We just launched our 1 Million Acres for the Future campaign. That's a coalition that overlaps with NSAC, that pulls from other folks, that is going to get all the way down to like local businesses. And our goal is to get, our official goal is to get maybe 100 organizations nationwide, but I've gotten up to coalitions of 1,000 organizations nationwide to say that we all care about the single issue. We care about land access for young and BIPOC farmers. And then you're able to go to DC and say millions of individuals care, hundreds of thousands of organizations care, businesses care, which that they care about a lot. And it gives that full picture of like who might get upset or who might be sad and not vote for them again when they're thinking about what to do next.
One last point. You said, you know, the value of state level engagement. Federal policymakers steal from the states all the time. And, you know, there's that old chestnut that, you know, states are the laboratory of democracy. Well, sometimes that's actually true, right? And sometimes states, you know, you'll have a really nice state legislator who cares a lot about something, or you'll be from a state where, you know, there's real change possible in ag and food policy, and you'll be able to do something at a state level that federal policymakers would never take a swing at. And you can prove that it works, and you can demonstrate it. And then once it's been demonstrated as a sound concept, or, you know, sound principle and sound program, federal policymakers will steal it. They won't credit you either, which kind of stinks, but like, program's the most important part. So they'll take it and they'll try to make it a national pilot, and then it'll become a national program, and then it's part of the Farm Bill, and then benefits farmers and producers for generations to come. So that matters a lot.
You have a really Washington-specific example of that with the Farmer Mental Health Bill that was enacted in 2018. That, maybe you all don't know, but that spurred other state bills nationally, not it's independent from Farm Bill, but it spurred other states to really want to care about farmer and farm worker mental health and to have the same type of bill that Washington had here. And then it spurred millions of dollars at the federal level, where now we're addressing farmer and farm worker mental health through our organizations, through a program called FARSAN that was really based on the original effort here in Washington.
Other questions? Oh,
I feel that federal policy struggles with federal law a lot, and I'm curious if, Indiana Bureau of Affairs is sharing the Bureau with whatever 15 other, or like tough member, Board of Service, everything. Could reforming, could changing this help, or do you guys have any suggestions for improving that kind of communication and just policies between a sovereign nation and this government?
wow.
Yeah, it's been lovely for hundreds of years, so.
Yes, but this is the part where I'm going to be a good ally and say I don't have the answers here, but there are people who do, and I would send you to Intertribal Ag Coalition as a primary source for all things related to tribal sovereignty and the nexus between tribal sovereignty and agriculture. Some really talented folks over there, Lexi Holden, Carrie Joe, some really wonderful folks who understand this space better than we do. And I'm going to be honest, when we are drafting a policy that, changes a food distribution program or that changes the way in which, a conservation program works, we call them and we ask them. And there's other organizations too, but they would be a good place to start and they can connect you to other folks.
I don't have anything to add to that. IAC would really be the main player for answering that question. But I can add a fun fact that the head of the current FSA came from IAC and was their policy director?
Yeah, Zach, yeah.
Yeah, policy director. And he's able to really carry, all of the issues that we really care about by having been in the FSA now. So
He's
fun
also-
fact and unrelated to your question, but
Well, and
I really love his work.
Yeah, no, Zach Ducheneau is who she's talking about, and he's the head of FSA, and I believe that he's a registered member of the Lakota tribe as well, which makes a bit of a difference. So,
I was just wondering if, so looking forward to the Farm Bill, what are the broad, what's your ask?
oh,
1 million acres for young farmers and BIPOC farmers. That's young farmers' ask and our only ask. And we acknowledge that that intersects with climate and sustainability and all the other issues, food security. But to us, it's about getting young farmers and BIPOC farmers on the land so that they can change the food system the way they want to see it. 1 million acres.
And see, this is the difference between somebody who is an advocate and somebody who's a policy dork, right? Because I'm going to give you a list of 400 different policy ideas that we want to advance. No, I'll take a page from Catherine's book. We want to see equity built into every element of agricultural policy in this next Farm Bill. We care, and our members care a great deal about conservation programs and the role that farmers can play in both the adaptation to and ultimately mitigation of climate change crisis. That is something that our members care a great deal about and that we've worked in for over 30 years. And we also care a lot about how food gets from that farm into a community in a way that makes it available to everybody and so that it's safe and affordable. And so we're working a lot on the money that is available now and will be coming available through the Farm Bill to improve supply chains and intermediary sort of structures that help make agriculture work, trying to make them resilient in a way that doesn't require individuals to be resilient, but to create a system that is resilient itself upon which farmers and producers and consumers can rely. Mm-hmm. I got small meat processing, right? I grow chickens in my backyard. I have, 200 birds, 400 birds. How am I going to get them to market? What do I need? Right? I either need access to scale appropriate slaughter in my own community, or I need mobile slaughter. I need an FDA inspector that's going to be there looking at that, or some sort of state-based program that has equivalent levels of inspection to gain access to my regional market. I need to maybe have the chillers that are necessary to refrigerate that product, which I don't have. And I need maybe to gather together with other folks to gain access to either direct market or wholesale or some other sort of maybe institutional market. What we need, first step, is that slaughter capacity. Second step is that cold chain. And that third step would be the programs that help support you in your marketing and connecting to the folks who are actually going to buy that product. So I'd say those 3 steps are all things that we're caring about within the supply chain. I didn't even realize I did that, but I've been doing this for a long time. So thank you for that.
I think from an organizing point of view, I'd say this is where, again, knowing the organizations that you trust and trusting some national organizations would come in handy. I think if we could sit down and you could tell me about the issue that you really care about and tell me how it relates to different geographies, then at the national level I can talk to our organizers in different areas and figure out what the best strategy is to move it forward in a way that makes sense and where folks are hearing from, where members of Congress are hearing from folks within their own district. And I'd say it's never lost, even if you feel like your member of Congress might not have as much power in an issue, it's never lost to talk to them. You don't know what conversations they're having or what power they have to move it. And again, what I found most powerful is when all of the members of Congress are hearing about a single issue everywhere at the same time.
Even if somebody's not on an ag committee, they still talk to their friends, right? So it's worth talking to them. And just as a general note, preaching to the choir feels great, but it's kind of useless. And that's a hard thing to accept. But if you've got a member who's doing everything that you want to, say thank you and move on to the person who isn't, right? Because your time is best spent trying to win over those folks to bring them in line with supporting the thing that you want to see happen and made real. And that's tough. Start with the friendly folks, start with the folks who you know are an easy win, and then sort of work your way into the conversations that are a little bit more difficult and can be potentially more challenging. But those are the ones that'll actually make the biggest difference. That isn't to say if you have somebody who is a champion, right, and that is that they are going to carry your issue come hell or high water, you want to support that person, right? That's an easy win, but you definitely want to be there for them, to support them whenever you can. Because the notion of a champion or somebody who's going to carry an issue through this really long, Byzantine, complex process with lots of negotiations, votes and bills and marker bills, and cultivate that relationship even as you go and try to win over those folks who may be less inclined to support your idea.
And don't forget to lobby organizations.
Yeah.
In terms of if you feel like you've only got champions, and sometimes I think it feels like that in Washington, depending on the issue that we're working on, then turn around and, if you know Farm Bureau around here, maybe lobby Farm Bureau, or if you know an organization or a business that has a national reach that might move on your issue. There's a lot of businesses that if they put their name and their brand on a bill, that would change things massively. And the only thing that's stopping them from it is more that they don't see themselves as an advocacy business or organization. They don't see their role in the structure. And so sometimes that can be really good investment if you feel like you want to do more. Yeah, it's harder to get a meeting, right? Because again, our members of Congress are paid to have meetings with us, so it's a bit easier to get that meeting. But people do it to me all the time, right? People want young farmers to put our name on a bill, a thing, a campaign, and it's as easy. It's a lot like dating. It's as easy as having getting that first conversation, then having a conversation, and it's very relational. Seeing where people are going, seeing what you think would be the talking point that might get them convinced, and then having that clear ask at the end of, what this involves is getting your organization's name on this sign-on letter, or having something very specific for them. But I'd say the hardest part of that, and the part where maybe it'd be good to talk about, like the privilege in a room like this, is who knows who, and whether you do know the CEO of X company that could really make change.
Catherine said it was like dating, which is really funny because now I'm imagining like Tinder for policies. Be like, no. Also, the average age of the U.S. senator is like, I think, pushing mid-70s, so that would be a pretty awkward Tinder profile.
What I mean is to trust your relational and emotional intelligence. Nothing else. We should put our contact information.
Wow, this is aggressive.
Just related to that, I do want to put our contact information up so you can have it, because I am open to being lobbied about issues. And if you all are seeing things in Washington or issues that you really want to bring up that you feel like we're not doing a good enough job at representing, or if you have ideas for solutions, like you read our newsletter and you're like, no, I would do it this way. It really does help us as much as it helps our elected officials to hear directly from farmers. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, guys. This is really helpful. We live for this stuff. Like, this is the world in which we live. So if there is any way that we can be helpful, please, don't hesitate to reach out. It may take us a little while to get back to you, at least me, because lots of emails, but I promise I will, and always happy to help, and always happy to lift up the issues that are of importance to you guys. So thank you very much. Super fun. Enjoyed it immensely. It's good.
Especially when we're really trying to build this state coalition to work with
I'm sorry, I should have plugged Coral more directly because I was so impressed with what Ann and Melissa said yesterday. I was like, oh, we gotta give them a bump, but then we went off in a
No,
different
but
direction.
that's fine. I mean, that's why I threw that meeting question in.
It's good. It's good. You're a pro. Like, I'm gonna set up this question in a way that I know that you're gonna answer it the way that I want you to answer it. It's good. It's good work.
Catherine, will you do a cheesy thing with me real quick? Can we get our picture taken
Yes.
so I can text it to Anita?
My mask is disgusting.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a little food safety
Yes.
presentation yesterday.
How'd it go?
I think it went good. People asked a lot of questions.
We don't have institutional members, but we
Anita's
do
been
have
teaching me a
ally
lot about how
members.
to teach,
Which
has been really good.
Right,
So,
right.
Anita's still there, right? She didn't quit yet. She didn't
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Listen, Kara left. Y'all are trying to break my heart. Are you ready? Yes.
We're in the process of reevaluating sort of how we structure our membership.
Yeah.
Just because there
Where do
are
you live?
folks like
I live in
yourself
North Central
that have
Washington.
connections to
Oh, right.
institutions that aren't in a position to join so directly.
Yeah, I'm in
Well,
Georgia.
that's
Yeah,
the thing,
so
like
it was.
trying to make a
But it
space
was-
for folks like
Yeah, just for
like
this.
universities, but also
We're
for
that cooperative agreement
other cooperatives or
that
coalitions that can't join.
with us. Karen and Aggie were there. Tills Alliance is also one of the sub-recipients. Part of the agreement is I actually have to go
Okay.
visit every sub-recipient. And then they just let me do a presentation while I was here, which is like really cool.
Okay,
And it's
good.
just been a
YOLO.
humbling- It's an amazing group of growers and farmers in this region.
What
Yeah, it's
what
been a real
what would
humbling,
work
like,
best for you?
invigorating, exciting.
Like institutionally work it.
Yeah, well, thanks for letting me. I'll let you talk to everybody.
Okay.
Y'all did a great job too. Bye.
Okay. Yeah. Something like that.
Would be
Yeah.
an air question or a
Right. Which is
recording question.
right. We sure can. Yeah. So
I'm sure there is.
sen-
We need some kind of here where we're not like advocating over it.
Right. If you get in touch, if you send an email to me, what I'll do is I'll
Are you a
connect you
farmer?
with Sarah, our new coalitions director,
Yeah.
or new grassroots director,
you
and figure out a way
aspiring?
to get you plugged in a
Or
way.
farming ally? Yeah.
What do you work on? What are your systems in particular?
Trying to figure out how to get
Okay.
into the
Okay.
agriculture space, but now I'm a student studying landscape design and urban agriculture, so I'm
Very cool.
hoping to
No.
learn animals and medicinal
Yes.
design, yeah.
That's awesome. And you're interested in advocacy?
Yes, I am, yeah. And I just, I love the second part, but I was hoping to get like that
Yeah.
overview.
Very important.
This is streamed online, so
Yeah, I bet you they have recordings, but I am not sure.
yeah, maybe it's better question for the staff.
Yeah.
Well, so she's one of my best friends. I got my PhD. We started basically cooperative together way back then. Way back when they were together.
Let's go see the staff person at the back.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And so even her, that's why I haven't gone either, but.
But let's try to.
He's like a word of Great. Well, we'll stay in touch. And thanks for coming. And nice to meet you, and I'm sorry to say
Of course, no problem. In north central Washington State, in the Methow Valley.
You too.
Yeah.
I love it.
Oh, more neighbors, pretty much.
We have the same high school farmers.
Cool. Very cool. I don't have cards with me because of COVID. It's just not a thing I do anymore. But you can always email me, and I'm actually very good at staying on top of emails and answering. So yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. Oh my goodness, hi. No, of course, yeah. Hi. I'm not sure.
I wanted to ask you guys about how you best engage with family foundations. I work for a family foundation that is still attempting to identify itself and
recommendations that have been like the right path that I can bring back and say this is part of how we're gonna go.
And by engage, you mean engage in advocacy or engage in terms of like funding?
The storytelling, the not something else.
So there's like advocacy and narrative change.
Advocacy that's pulling back from, because we can't, as a organization, we can't go out, we can't directly lobby, we can't do legislation. But there's so much, we're just here to educate, right? That we're trying to figure out how do we use her funds to the biggest impact?
Yeah.
The lobbying being a firewall away from us, and direct lobbying.
She doesn't want to do direct lobbying.
She is doing direct lobbying, we finally convinced her after 3 years to
Okay.
hire a lobbyist.
C3C4 split.
Say it again?
You have a 501c3 split.
No, we're the C3 Foundation, and she's just using her private funds to hire a lobbyist.
Okay.
And I don't know what they're gonna end up doing with that arrangement.
Fascinating. We've had really good luck with foundations writing letters of support and letters to the editor, and yeah, lobbying with us in DC or talking to our elected officials with us in DC.
And those letters to the editor or things like that, have they stated an opinion about legislation?
Well, you can do it one of two ways. You can directly support a legislation, but usually what we do also, because we're only a C3 and we're very mindful of how we put our name out there, is be in support of an issue or a campaign, like the 1 Million Acre campaign, and write a letter around that. And that separately will have its own ask and its own kind of DC life, but the kind of public life of it, no, it's about getting land access to young and BIPOC farmers, and that seems to be easier for folks to get engaged in and feel like they're further away from the like C3 lobbying kind of issues. And then I'd say at least Young Farmers Works